would like to greet you today, and I appreciate your attendance of this forum under the title Arab Gulf States and Mashreq Transformations Case Studies. And I would like to confirm that these cases discussed in this sessions are related to Saudi Arabian foreign policy, two-state solutions by Dr. Ahmed Jamil. Also, why has U.S. policy failed to halt Houthi attacks and what are the implications for the Gulf states by researcher Fawzi Lagwaidi? And third, can Gulf states be a power broker in post-Assad Syria presented by Dr. Batul Dogan? These cases are coming in the context of the war after Al-Aqsa flood by the Zionist Israel and the support of USA, and also the axis of resistance and a testimony of that were the events of the war. It was an Israeli war in seven different landscapes or fronts, including the occupied Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Iran, Tunisia, as well as the Israeli attack on the state of Qatar. And in Tunisia, they had targeted the flotilla fleet, and they also penetrated maritime corridors and borders by Israeli forces, and also the resistant access had drones also penetrating other borders, and this war and the wars by the Zionist entity were always supported by the US and the West, and this was the longest war in the history of the Arab Zionist conflict. It has gone beyond 2 years and it continues in Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. It's still going on and it can renew itself in other landscapes such as Iran and Yemen. And next to the military operations, there are diplomatic and political conflict to reshape the Arab Mashreq, including the GCC, and implications on the GCC. The Trump project, called by him the peace building and by the White House in the Middle East, including 20 points, was sponsored in the Sharm el Sheikh summit last October, and the de facto situation of Israel expanding its occupation and existence in Syria after destroying its military and logistic capabilities and having security control of Syria and also military existence in south of Lebanon. And this is a part of the Israeli alliance with the USA to have military existence, including in the south of Lebanon, and imposing a new reality in Syria and Lebanon, where the USA and Israel define and decide what happens to their resources, and also placing Gaza under a mandate and Israeli occupation and destroying resources in the West Bank, and also the ongoing process to Judaize Palestine and the Greater Israel project all have serious implications. And the project is already underway among the Arab countries in the high risk indicators. These risk indicators include the end of Sykes-Picot and going beyond or circumventing sovereignty and national borders, fragmenting Arab countries and nations. This is dangerous and it includes the GCC. And accordingly, approaching these three study cases or case studies needs to be comprehensive, and we should all discuss them with the objective of limiting the Israeli US project. It is known that the only real ally of the USA in the region is Israel. As for Arab countries, especially in light of the recent national security strategy, they are only tools for the USA, and they need to accept the de facto situation imposed by Israel and accept the imposed normalization with Israel and the continuation of the Israeli expansion and annexation of Palestine into the Zionist entity. And we need to remember that this greater Israel project includes Syria, Lebanon, parts of Iraq, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. So, this was a small overview, and with our discussions, we might elaborate. But now, let us start with the presentation of the research papers, starting with Dr. Ahmed Jamil. Dr. Ahmed Jamil has a long record. If you look into his CV, he has great academic achievements, not only in Palestine, but also in the Arab region. He is quite prolific in research. And I don't want to take too long, but you can refer to your booklet. He will be discussing Saudi foreign policy, and the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution. The two-state solution has been there for a long time, but there was an initiative about it last September in the New York Declaration, where Saudi Arabia and France co-chaired this meeting, and the approval was passed by 150 countries, and around 18 countries recognized the Palestinian state at the time. So the doctor can speak more about this, and the main issue we're discussing here is the situation and how realistic these efforts are in light of what we talked about: the American Israeli project, the state of war, the targeting of Arab countries, and subjugating them to certain conditions. So we've seen that the USA kept the Palestinian delegation even from attending this meeting, and this has its own indications. And the Zionist entity has completely forgone the two-state solution, and they never mention any possibility for a Palestinian state. Go ahead, Dr. Ahmed Jamil. I'm sorry for taking too long in my introduction. Good afternoon. Allow me in the beginning to thank the Arab Center, Dr. Marwan and his team as well. This is not only a nice city, they've been so professional. So my paper revolves around the Saudi policy in the context of the genocidal war against Gaza. There is a main conceptualization that asking what happened to the regional projects before the war. So the political stances from normalization and the Palestinian question after the war, or also the Saudi rapprochement with Iran. So did the roots, or did all of these roots change after the war? So allow me to present this paper, which might be too academic, but I collected a huge number of documents and speeches, and I found myself lost and I cannot analyze them. But this was scientific, legitimate confusion in my research. And I found that I needed three theoretical entrances. I will not go into too many details, but I couldn't understand the Saudi policies without the constructive entrance or theory that focuses on ideas, identity, and social relations in international relations, and also the new realistic theory to understand the polarities of major forces and the world order. And last but not least, the realistic theory on the interests of the state and the calculations of a state for each country. At the end of the day, Saudi Arabia has its own interests, for example. So the paper has three main parts. First, the historical background, the situation, the regional situation just before October 2023, and then the situation just after the war. And so we have a huge historical background that I cannot cover in these few minutes, but quite quickly, I would like to recall with you some main things. The Saudi American relationship and the foreign policy of Saudi Arabia right now are associated with the post World War II, the famous meeting of President Roosevelt and King Al Saud on Quincy and Al Murra. In the lake of Suez. And it is worth noting that until today, there is still interest in that meeting. This picture dates back to 1920, and Saudi Arabian newspapers are still celebrating the meetings that took place in 1945 and were part of the regional order in this area, and put the foundations for the Saudi American relationship. To understand the Saudi foreign policy, I had to understand the identity, world order, nationalist interests. This is the table that you can see here. I cannot go into details in it, but in order to understand the Saudi status quo, we need to understand how this came to fruition since 1945 until today, starting with the Saudi stance in the beginning about the Palestinian question, how the ideological factor came into play, Iranian influence, transformations in sects in Saudi Arabia, also Saudi concerns in the beginning on the UK issues, and shared concerns between Saudi Arabia and the USA regarding the Cold War and the Arab Cold War. All of these are explained in my research paper. Also, the role of the Israeli lobby in many phases. Now we're talking about the Saudi American Defense Agreement, and we cannot forget the AWACS agreement in the 80s and the Israeli objection. Now I will go into the main issue or the essence of the paper. Let me stop at the 1945 issue just quickly. It is said often that oil was the main topic between the talk in the talk between Roosevelt and Abdulaziz. But when I read the minutes of that meeting, in reality, the Palestinian question dominated that meeting, and this is quite important. King Abdulaziz used sentences as documented by the State Department, the USA, that Jews need to go back to the countries where that they were kicked out of, and the danger of continuous displacement and migration. And Roosevelt pledged that he will not do anything to anger the Arabs at the time. The petrol issue was something that they took for granted as if there are agreements already. But Roosevelt died only 2 months after meeting King Abdulaziz. And so Harry Truman came and he said the Jewish voters or the Jewish lobby in his talks with Arab ambassadors, he said, I don't have Arab voters, I have Jewish voters. And so this Israeli lobby started this nationalist interest map and the world order map and a world order that is based on the Cold War. And then the Israeli lobby, this still rules us, but it has changed a little. The American security umbrella, and we talked quite a lot yesterday and today about the Carter Doctrine, but I believe that the American umbrella cannot be understood without the Eisenhower Doctrine 57, Nixon 69, Carter 1980. And why I think is the Nixon Doctrine is more important for us to understand this moment compared to Carter Doctrine. Eisenhower and Carter pledged to use U.S. military forces to intervene in the Gulf or in areas that are facing Shiite danger. Nixon in 1969 changed Eisenhower doctrine. He said, we will not be providing soldiers or direct military intervention. We will provide military exercises. We will sell you weapons. However, we will not provide direct support. Carter came back to Eisenhower doctrine. Right now, we are looking at Nixon minus. What we're talking about is something that goes even less than Nixon doctrine. So, in the foreign policy of the USA, there has been transformations. Here I wrote 2018, but what I mean is 2008 actually. Obama started to gradually withdraw from the region, and why I will go back to why this happened. But as a result of Obama's plan, there were several events that were a point of difference between the Gulf and the US administrations, and there was an understanding with Trump to overcome what had happened in the Obama administration, but also in Trump's administration. Things happened to weaken the trust between USA and the Gulf, the Arab Spring, and the nuclear agreement, the attacks against Aramco, which we discussed this morning, the Houthi attacks against Abu Dhabi. So all of these were milestones that struck the Gulf trust in their relationship with the USA. I cannot move on to the next point without recalling the Saudi stances on all of these issues. For a long time, Saudi Arabia took the initiative on the Palestinian question. I'm not trying to overestimate their stance, but in 67 to 73, Saudi Arabia played a huge diplomatic role that I might elaborate on in another occasion on having the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian state. They played an important role in 81 to 82. There was the Prince Fahd initiative, who became a king later in FAS summit. He played an important role, and he started a process, the process of the declaration of the Palestinian state. Also 2001, the Arab Initiative for Peace, and now we have the two-state solution summit or meeting or declaration. So Dr. Marwan this morning indicated something. I don't know if he's still here with us, but he mentioned something related to petrol, to oil. Yes, oil is a main factor in the relations with the USA. Saudi Arabia was under many transformations. In 2001, USA used to import 23% of its oil from the Gulf. By 2025, estimations to say that it's only 7% now, including 4.1% from Saudi Arabia. In 2005, they imported 60% of what they need. Now 30%. So the most importantly, since 2018, 2019, USA is exporting more than it's importing. They're importing because their refineries need some technical things that force them to import, but they are exporters now, and this changes so many calculations. So the repercussions of the American oil independence, and this is not something that we invented. This is something coined by the U.S. administrations, oil independence, and the withdrawal from the addiction to the Arab oil. So As we've seen in 2019, there were attacks on Aramco facilities in Qiq and Khreis and other areas. At the time, the US administration said that they will not intervene without certain prerequisites and conditions. And so this started to look like the US no longer needs the Gulf. But this was shattered when the Ukraine war started. They realized their need for the Saudi oil and Qatari gas. They came and asked for extra amounts of fuel, as same as had happened in 1988 in the Gulf War. Saudi Arabia refused and coordinated with Russia at times, reduced or increased the expenditure, and so the oil expenditure was no longer coordinated. That is because the US umbrella was no longer there. Qatar, due to reasons related to the market, did not approve either. So, when the 2019 2022 shock happened and the Joseph Biden administration came, they said we cannot abandon the Gulf like Obama did and Trump did as well. We need new coordination and new contract with the Gulf, and we need to have a new conceptualization of the region and Saudi Gulf relationships with the USA. And so they started talking about a Saudi American defense agreement. There were negotiations in, before the 7th of October 2023. It was an attempt to institutionalize the Nixon doctrine to provide expertise and support, but we will not send soldiers. The Nixon doctrine was a message to the Congress, and I believe that this was an attempt to bring back the Eisenhower doctrine. I believe it's an attempt to bring back the Nixon doctrine. So no major agreement can be passed by the Congress without the approval of the Jewish Israeli lobby. For example, when there was an agreement, a nuclear agreement with Iran, there was an uproar from the lobby. And so, as I said, there was a need for an alliance with the Gulf, and there were voices from the region speaking about that. So, before 7th of October, there were negotiations for military cooperation. And in September, just before the war, less than a month before the war, the USA had a competitor of the Chinese Silk Road, which is the Green Corridor, India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, which would require incorporating or integrating Israel. We have alliances that Saudi Arabia wasn't part of, but they were part of the formation of the region. For example, the I2U2 agreement, Dr. Marwan indicated a very important paper issued by the Arab Center about this alliance that is based on Israel, USA, India, and UAE. And it has a new conceptualization of many things in the region, and most importantly, an attempt to put India in the place of China. And the USA refused to deal with Jaffa port, where China was rewarded the port to manage it until another port was in place and India was in charge of managing it. So many topics are involved where India is taking the place of China. Also, there were talk about a new Middle Eastern NATO. There was a meetings in several countries talking about a Middle Eastern NATO. This was all before the war. Then the war started. What happened? If you remember, the American Secretary of State at the time said that he wants a carte blanche, Arab carte blanche, to destroy everything in Gaza. And the Arab stance started moving. Since our papers about Saudi Arabia moved in three directions. The Arab Islamic Summit that was in the 11th of November 2023 2023, resulting in a joint committee. The committee continued working for 1 year until the International Alliance for the Two-State Solution in New York 2024, and then the New York Declaration last September. So the Arab Summit announced and stance that was at odds with the Arab approval to work without any deterrent. And there was Arab Islamic collective work. We all remember when the Palestinian Minister of Foreign Affairs was not permitted to speak, and they said that his visa wouldn't let him speak at the event at the time. And then Saudi Arabia was working on three levels during the war: the Arab Islamic Summit, and then September 2024, they started the International Alliance for the Two-State Solutions with meetings in Oslo, Cairo, Riyadh, Rabat, and in September 2024, at the same time where the International Alliance was announced, an international conference for peace was announced, and Switzerland was in charge of managing this file. For some reason, they didn't do that. In December, Saudi Arabia and France were assigned to manage it. I will not mention all of these dates and all of these details. Well, my main interest is this table. What is the difference between talking about the two-state solution before the 7th of October and what happened in the two-state solution alliance? Why did the USA refuse what was proposed? The new proposal by Saudi Arabia, and that was proposed by the International Alliance with full Arab agreement, was changing the rules of the game, the Arab game. Since Oslo 1993, there is the thought that the singular US sponsorship keeps anyone from mediating in the settlement process other than the USA's. China, Russia are marginalized. And so Saudi Arabia, France, other European countries have had a multipolar framework and then a mechanism for communication. I don't know that this presentation is not very popular with all of you, but please listen to me until the end. Also, if reaching a solution, all of Oslo and what precedes that were based on negotiations. So if you read the alliance documents and statements by Saudi officials, they say literally, we will not accept a peace process. We do not want a peace process. We do not want to start negotiations. We want to start a process that establishes the Palestinian state and then discuss other things, even at the bilateral level with Israel. This is a new discourse that didn't take place before this. Regionally and on the Palestinian level, there was talk about the Abrahamic Accord and normalization. All of that talk before the 7th of October said that normalization might come years later with a Palestinian state. But now the new approach or the new discourse adopted with the two-state solution alliance and the New York Declaration is that the Palestinian state would come before any other project, and then other steps. What are the other steps? In the Israeli logic, you are facing a de facto situation every day, and the new discourse, which didn't change reality, but it was provided by Saudi Arabia, a menu of measures. They said each country needs to choose measures to be done. 19 countries acknowledged the state of Palestine, and some of them talked about sanctions to be imposed on Israel, and also a structure of countries, 8 working group to continue working, and also the U.S. stance. And this explains a great deal of what is happening. The U.S. stance started in the Biden administration as a witness. They attended meetings in Riyadh and in several occasions, but when Trump came in June 2025, before a conference was held with French Saudi sponsorship, he sent a telegram for countries saying that any procedures against Israel after the conference will be at odds with the interests of USA, and he made threats that there will be repercussions with Washington. In July 2025, there was a official statement that USA rejects the two-state solution conference, and then As you remember, there were the UN sessions where Trump attacked the UN and the two-state solutions. One day, exactly one day after his attack, he received Arab and Muslim leaders, and at that meeting, he had to change and rescind many of his threats and propose the 20-point plan that we have many reservations on it, but it was an important thing. Also, the bombardment of Qatar, Saudi Arabia was one of the first to dedicate to say that in its statement that we need to dedicate our resources to stand against Israel, and they are destabilizing the region. Also, there was the alliance with Pakistan, and as you remember, there was talk about integrating India. We know that Pakistan is going at odds with the American approach. And also, we have the new agreement, the American Saudi defense agreement. We still do not have full information, but the information that we have about this agreement is that it's humble, limited, related to armament deals, but it's not strategic defense agreement, or it's not based on the Eisenhower or Nixon doctrines. It's pretty far from the Carter doctrine, and this has its reasons. The reasons, in summary, and will be my conclusion. Simply, the Saudi American defense agreement was less comprehensive and less clear with the USA for reasons. Reaching an agreement simply because there is regression of the leverage of the Israeli lobby in the USA. This might be temporary or partial, but even the American right wing and MAGA and these movements that want to make America great again are now having clear opinions that we provided so much to Israel at the expense of the USA. So there are transformations to be monitored here. And we have regional projects for trade corridors, such as the Green Corridor. I'm not saying that they are over. There are reports that some part of them are underway, are under constructions, especially the parts with the occupation. And I believe that the idea, which was discussed in India, has taken some steps back. The and it will take a step back. It will keep taking steps back. There is an explicit Saudi stance saying that we will not go through any new regional plans without certain conditions. We will not build a new region before a solution to the Palestinian question, and then we might think about things. There is more Gulf orientation to rely on themselves, then not replace the USA, but diversify their partners. There is dependence on relations with China, Russia. There is diversification and security, and I believe we shouldn't underestimate the role of Gulf countries in international mediation, not only at the level of regional issues. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman, in some main files, are conducting important mediation processes, even in Europe and Switzerland. They feel like they are taking a step back in this kind of work. There are many observations about Gulf mediation. I cannot elaborate on that, but each country is working by itself. And the last point, what does all of this mean for the Palestinian question? I talked about about its implications for the region, but what does it mean for the Palestinian question? So if we analyze the Saudi discourse in the past 2 years, if King Abdulaziz started talking about brotherhood and the issue of the identity. In the past 2 years, there was a great deal of talk about not just managing the crisis, but resolving this conflict. And so, the part of the great part of the Saudi discourse talks about the solutions. There were two routes: one led by Saudi Arabia to find a resolution for the conflict via the two-state solution; another route in Qatar and Egypt to attempt to stop the war and manage the crisis. I can say that Egypt and Qatar tried to manage the conflict and stop it. Saudi Arabia was working on resolving the conflict. Now we need to integrate both approaches. We need to sustain the efforts that were started, saying that the world, Europe, and the rest of the world need to do something to instill the Palestinian state without waiting for the USA to intervene. And before the 7th of October, and this is the last sentence I'll say, before the 7th of October, we used to say that what is happening is a management of the conflict and we need a new solution for the conflict. I believe that now we need to revise that and we need both. We need to impose a solution for the conflict without waiting for Israel to take a step. This and without waiting for the USA and develop that. USA is destroying, killing, and exterminating people in Gaza and the West Bank every day. We shouldn't wait for the two-state solution. We shouldn't wait for reaching a Palestinian state, because if the situation continues, there will not be any horizon for any Palestinian state in reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. You took 25 minutes, but seems that you enjoyed. I have Fawzi Guwedi, and he will be talking about the navigation, Bab el Mandab, Straits of Hormuz, and also the role of Yemen, the Houthis, the part of Yemen that the Houthis lead, and also the way Israel and America dealt with that, and why. And I want to remind you that as soon as an agreement was reached with America to stop attacks on American ships, but this is part of the war. The targeting of Israel continued. Mr. And please try to respect the 15-minute time limit. Assalamu alaikum. This is the only paper on Yemen. Maybe you can give me more minutes. First of all, I want to clarify something. The story behind this paper, maybe the title shows some bias, but this was an opinion piece I wrote last April or May. I tried to attract the attention of the readers. When the agreement between America and the Houthis was signed to stop the attacks, there was some exaggeration and some underestimation, and when what was happening in the Red Sea was nothing but a conspiracy theory. I wanted to shed light some on what's happening and the Houthis' intervention in support in support of Gaza. For those who do not know about the context of Yemen and how the Houthis, they started in the 1990s. Their ideological thing. As a historian, there are different narratives and some ambiguity whether what the Houthis say about themselves or what others wrote about them. From 2004 to 2010, there were 6 wars between the Houthis and the Ali Abdullah Saleh regime. Then 2014, they managed to control the Saada was their main bastion. Then they went to Sana'a and then they reached Aden, and the legitimate government called for the military intervention, and the Saudi led coalition entered the fray. There was, of course, Iranian support and the military capabilities they acquired from controlling their armies. This transferred them from a local militia to a regional power, and they started using ballistic missiles with a range of 2,000 kilometers. Also, drones was an asymmetrical tool of war, and then the naval capabilities. 2 years before the 7th of October, the Houthis focused all their attention or their financial resources on developing their naval capabilities like the sea drones, rigged boats, etc. The Houthis managed to control a frigate, a UAE frigate, and also they seized a ship, a Korean ship, which was carrying cargo to Saudi Arabia, and this led them to believe that their naval capabilities were important. After the Al Aqsa flood on the 7th of October, at the end of October 2023, the Houthis started launching regular attacks, more than 100 attacks on commercial ships, which led to a 20% increase in the insurance cost and a direct impact on the energy side. Of course, America will not keep quiet. In December, or a month after the attacks by Houthi started, they had the Guardian of Prosperity, and then they realized that naval attacks were not enough. They started using joint aerial attacks with Britain, and from January 2024 onwards, there were deployments of naval pieces in the Indian Ocean. In the first year, there were indications that the Americans failing in their attempt to contain the Houthis because all major companies started avoiding the Bab el Mandab and the Red Sea, and the insurance costs doubled, and the Houthi attacks were not impacted. Then, when Trump came to power, he designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. Then he launched a new military campaign. And then, after that, many months later, they signed an agreement with the Houthis. But the aims that Trump announced were not achieved, and the cost was increasing. So, this is, in a nutshell, what happened in the last 4 or 5 years. I wanted to apply that to there is integrated deterrence, Michael Mazer's theory, which says that the contemporary security environment should not rely on the military tools but can use the economic, diplomatic, and information. It helps you to have an effective deterrence. The United States used only the military tool, and that's why its deterrence did not work. And also, the Houthis, of course, the Americans ignored the diplomatic tool. Later on, they resorted to that jointly with Oman. They designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. They imposed sanctions. And on the information side, the Americans lost the war of the narrative. The Houthis always raised the slogan of death to America, death to Israel, and from 2004 until now, then the Americans only focused on the aerial and naval attacks. So their military operations did not mean a success in their deterrence. Also, the so-called strategic steadfastness, if we apply this framework to analyze what the Houthis did, the Houthis showed some flexibility in adapting to the American attacks. In March, the Americans managed to assassinate some military commanders, but they changed their tactics. They did not hold meetings in exposed places. They did not use one vehicle for more than one. I think they managed to shoot down an MK5 or something drone. They managed to shoot down 5 to 8. This is, I think, each drone cost 30, $40 million. And also, the Houthis got some outside help to sustain their defiance. Also, the other theory, which is the political economy for this conflict and the political economy of conflict theory, the Houthis used to get help from Iran, and the legitimate government seized a number of ships and also of the Macha uh, port, and they managed to see some drones in the Hadramaut Valley. This is what they managed to confiscate. We don't know what got through, and 2/3 of the Yemeni population live under Houthi control and 1/3 under the legitimate government. The Houthis managed to establish parallel networks of smuggling goods and money and things to resist the sanctions. And also, the Houthis used to use very cheap drones vis-a-vis very expensive American missiles. This was a political factor. Also, there is a political actor and economic factor, and the Americans relied on a breakdown of the Houthi regime from within. Of course, the Houthis' intervention came as a response to the Israeli genocide in Gaza, and this gave them a ideological cover, sort of. And Dr. Mohammed Saloon talked about the guardian of prosperity that some Gulf countries did not want to be involved in. What happened in the last 2 years? I think the Houthis gained a lot of experience since the 7th of October. They developed their tactics, they learned from the experience, and now they realize that the Bab el Mandeb is an important strait for the Gulf countries to export oil and gas. And this means that any existential threat to the Houthis will make them target the Bab el Mandeb Strait. In conclusion, when the military power is used on its own, it will not be enough as a deterrence, and also they are not a state, they have more flexibility as actors, smaller actors, to sustain their steadfastness, and also the political economy is the main catalyst for sustaining the the conflict as recommendations when to adopt the dime strategy is important. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Mr. Fauzi. Now we came to the last speaker, Dr. Batul Dogha Natash. She will be speaking about the role of the Gulf states. Can they play a power broker role in post Assad Syria? And Syria, of course, faces many challenges militarily, economically, and politically. شكرا جزيلا. سأتحدث بالإنجليزي.
I would like to say first, thank you everyone for being here just before the lunch. I am lucky to present with the last session. Thank you, Arab Center, for organizing this very timely event, bringing all these scholars together. And I think I was lucky with the panel as well, with distinguished speakers focusing on different regions. We moved with Palestine, Yemen, now we are going back to Syria, having all the impact of regional countries. So my paper has two questions. The first one is the title. Can Gulf states be a power broker in the post-Assad Syria? This is the first question, and this is the main question that I will discuss. But it comes with a second sub-question, which asks if any of these countries, if any of the powers in Syria are the real winners, who won, statistical-led powers or reform callers? Because it's a mixed situation at the moment. So the Gulf monarchies, they have been epicenters of Syrian politics. And I will analyze all the questions in the four big themes in my paper. The first one, I will talk about the early responses of the monarchies in the Arab Spring, then the milestones of 2015, which I call them, then the normalization process, and then we have the revolution of 8th of December. So in the early years, as you all know very well, the target of Arab Gulf monarchies was to contain Iran and its enlargement in Syria, using Syria as a proxy power or as an ally in its broader regional affairs. There are many examples where we have seen clashes between the Arab Gulf states and Syrian regime in respect with their relations with Iran. Iran was the biggest enemy, and as the previous Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia said, Adel al-Jubair, we are determined to confront any Iranian moves in Syria. And his previous colleague, Saud bin Faisal, also said, Syria is a land occupied by Iran. So this was the biggest problem. The second phase of their response regarding the first stage of Arab Spring implications in Syria was their response to extreme violence. Arab Gulf states are monarchies, but none of them has a system to brutally crack down any popular unrest in the region. They do have a counseling mechanism in the society. They are ruled by the peace and istishara mechanism and counseling mechanism between the rulers and society. This didn't happen in Syrian revolution. And the response from Arab Gulf states was quite clear. They said they are with the civilians and they don't call any more violent response from the Syrian regime. And this is why they suspended Syria's membership in the Arab League in the very early stage in November 2011. The third phase of their response to the early days of Arab Spring was their logistic support to opposition. So this is when we start having more contradicting policies of Arab Gulf states. It was a sort of proxy war at the beginning, then moved to from a regional proxy to a global proxy between different powers. As you all know, Saudis, Qataris, and Turkish state as a triple union at the beginning supported logistically the opposition forces, and United Arab Emirates were somehow engaged with it at the initial stage. And this was done through a headquarter in Jordan and a headquarter in Turkey. And in all these support of logistic, there were four main problems which are actually have implications even today's cooperation. The first problem of their logistic support was some parties in the Gulf, they do had private funding for the opposition, which later came as the terrorist cooperation claims, and they had issues with the US governance because now not all the actors in Syria supporting the opposition, not all of them were civilian or peaceful. They had issues with the central governance in the state and other parts of the world. This is why the United Nations actually called them to support only the actors they are clear in their transitional force with using more peaceful purposes. The second problem of their backing was none of the countries were on the same page in regard to whom to support in Syria. As you all know, Turkey and Qatar, they supported more Ikhwan-oriented partners, including more radical Islamist groups, which are running now the Syrian transitional process. Then Saudi Arabia was, of course, because of its overall discussion for anti-political Islamist move in the Middle East. It was more with the secular groups who can actually work under a cooperation with the Free Syrian Army, but they don't have any radical Islamist narrative or calling for Islamic democracy. So this was a big differentiating moment, a logic of differences between the parties supporting the opposition in Syria. And United Arab Emirates, as you may all guess, were in the same page with Saudi in the stage in support of secular groups who are not calling for Islamic democracy in Syria, who are against the regime but not with a radical Islamic narrative. This was all the idea of being on the page of tolerant Islam, being religious but not being politically Islamist. So all these narrative of UAE in its domestic and regional politics, of course, had implications in the Syrian policy. And this is how actually UAE continued to support Syrian regime in different ways. They did have somehow economic sanction broker cooperation, and they had an embassy, Syrian embassy in Abu Dhabi. Oman and Kuwait, they were always diplomatic in their cooperation as two other countries bringing to discussion. And they were always trying to reach a level of balance between parties to reach a proper solution in Syria. And the third issue, backing the Syrian Syrian opposition logistically, is a potential rivalry between Qatari and Saudi policymakers or political elites. We do mention about countries who are brotherly and whose diplomatic relations is beyond their nation-state history. They have transnational ties. They do cooperate in many cases, but also leading a quite critical regional conflict is something else. And Qatar, with its all punching above its weight policy, bringing new actors to its regional policy and bigger alliances with Turkey in the broader Middle East project, Saudi Arabia wasn't always happy with the choices of Qatari foreign policy making. So this is why in this stage, right before the Russian intervention, Syria has become more into an intra-Gulf rivalry. And the fourth issue about this triple consortium between Saudi, Qatari, and Turkish cooperation was actually their expectation from the post-Assad Syria, and which will be our final point in this paper. For Turkey, the terrorist attacks on Turkish soil by ISIS, by PKK was a big problem. Northern security border was a big problem. But for Saudi, it is more like regional stability, containment of Iran, and bringing a stable transitional governance in Syria rather than having a radical Islamic narrative. And Qatar was almost on the same page with this too, but bringing a third way, support the reform. We can change the status quo, but who is going to direct the status quo change wasn't clear. And the second milestone in all these discussions, all these narratives over the Syria was the milestones of 2015. We had Saudi Arabia-led military intervention in Yemen, and my colleague just mentioned about the details of the Houthi role in it, involvement in it. With this intervention, as you may all guess, Saudis and Emiratis turned their face to Yemen to contain Iran and to indicate how powerful they are in terms of channeling their political targets in the region and bringing a new narrative to their foreign policy. The third issue is Russian involvement in the Russian war. Since Russia has almost a great air force, and since they supported Assad by all means, their involvement brought a big change as somehow perpetuating the all military success so far opposition had. And the third problem was the transitional threat of ISIS with rising after 2015. This somehow distracted their attention in the war because Turkey had also domestic issues with ISIS. ISIS bombed Turkish capital, and all these regional proxy turned into a global proxy without any of the actors having a proper quick solution for the ongoing conflict, because more than one party involved and more than way of problem was in the page. Amid all these things, we have Saudi and Qatari policies somehow cooperating for not being completely opposed to Russian intervention, but trying to find a third way in Syria to reach at least a sort of diplomatic process. Even if Assad stays on the power, let's keep reform running and let's have a peaceful Syria. But Emirati politics was difficult and different from the other. Obviously, they were calling for a pure secular governance, and the narrative of the Emirati rulers were all oriented to that. This is why they could actually support any actor who can go against the ongoing Islamist and political Islam narrative in the Syrian opposition, because this was the dominating voice rather than the liberal ones. So this is why the ISIS threat articulated to Emirati narrative in Syria, they did see ISIS as an addition of ongoing so-called moderate political Islam in Syria. They said, what if ISIS turn into the unified or only face of radical groups in the Syrian land? Territory. And increasing role of Turkey in Syria as its backing Islamist was a big problem for UAE, and then they had escalated the tension between two parties. Because Turkey did support parties who can unify the ongoing military opposition, who can actually fight properly with the Assad regime. They did support militarily, logistically, financially, and politically. But none of these small groups were powerful enough to reach a proper fight, because Russia had even bigger military intervention. But even this support, fragile and partial, from Turkey was a threat to UAE, because what if any of these political Islamists could run Syria as we have today? So the Emirati governance then also supported secular Kurds in Rojava, which is a big threat for Turkish security, as they are calling for a separate Kurdish state in Turkish territory, and this was a big problem between two parties. And the war economy is the last title that UAE had different positions than Saudi Arabia and Qatar in Syria. They had good relations economically with Syrian regime before the war, and they used or channeled the conditions of monopolizing economy in the war process. They were able to have the Syrian diaspora money in Abu Dhabi, running the Assad's companies and his family members in UAE, as if they are doing now with the Russian oligarchs and Russian political elites who are trying to rechannel their economic power. This is all reflecting a powerful policymaking from Abu Dhabi, but it is not on the same page with the other Gulf capitals. So the normalization is the third stage right before the revolution of December last year in Syria. The containment of Iran and sustaining regional stability was somehow shaking in Syria, and starting from UAE in 2018, then Oman in 2020, and Saudi Arabia in 2023, then Syria was back to Arab League, and we start having more Assad visible in the Arab pages, Arab newspapers. What if he stay in the power and accept the mild reforms? So he was somehow a new face of Syrian regime with the war already continuing. But Qatar completely rejected any sort of continuity of Assad regime in the Syria. And then last year in December, right after the Astana meetings in Doha, at the first, I guess, or the second day of Doha Forum, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and other Qatari officials declared that a big change happened in Syria, and now Syrians are free because Assad ran away to Russia. So all these changes happened, and a big regional vacuum occurred over the Syria. So the initial responses of the Gulf monarchies to revolution on December wasn't similar. United Arab Emirates somehow warned for stable governance and unified Syrian voice in this process, but they never mentioned in their official narrative as a success of opposition or a change in the transition, as if there is nothing changed properly in Syria. For Saudi Arabia, they had a very moderate, very hegemonic response. They act for decade-long, I'm not going to call it brotherly, but decade-long wisdom of being a partner of Middle East states. They said there are changes in Syria, and we are support of this current situation which is going to reach a peaceful process. So they had a very moderate but constructive comment on it. Qatar said clearly it was a success of opposition, and they are with the Syrian governance by all means. In this process, first of all, the Qatari and Saudi governance, the ruling elites, they supported Damascus with their economic support. They paid public salaries. They also issue with the debt of Syria to World Bank, and they issued another humanitarian support bill to Syria. So they were there to back the ongoing process in Syria. And they also somehow eased the situation to let Trump change the idea over the sanctions. But in the last point of my paper, I will question the winners of the current case in Syria. Did we have really a winner? Is the reform callers are winners, or the status quo callers are the winners? In my take, reformers, or the ones who supported change, of course, they have a bigger and positive outcome of the current situation, but they have to deal with the ones who supported Assad and regime. So only reformers or only supporting change will not work in the current Syrian situation. They have to deal with all parties involved in the war, including Putin. And second situation is, even like UAE and Oman, who had partial support to Assad, they have to revise their Syrian policymaking to be part of the current situation. Otherwise, they might feel isolated in the ongoing transitional process, which I don't think will be the case. And third point, Syria knows the experience in Iraq and Egypt. They know, al-Shara knows how to be next Morsi. He knows what to do to not be the next Morsi. This is why the experience of Iraq and Egypt is in their hands, and they might definitely mirror this experience to not have the same issues with the regional powers and global powers. The fourth point about the current situation is the reaching a common point in the Gulf. Are these Gulf countries going to cooperate for the sake of their regional ambitions and for a stable Syria? Or are they going to compete, because definitely they will have rivalries in domestic politics of Syrian regime, in the economic infrastructure, as Syria now poses a lot of opportunities and challenges for the Gulf monarchies. And then here, my metaphorical example is Yemen, as my colleague mentioned. If they don't want to have another Yemen in the Middle East, then the only option is to cooperate rather than supporting the fragile and divided actors in Syria. And this is definitely bring Turkey in the scene. As Turkey is calling for a united Syria due to its own threat perception with the Kurds in Syrian state, they are calling for a unified and united Syria and they are eager to talk and communicate with the Gulf monarchies, as the official press mentioned many times, for this sake. But Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said, Israel is the elephant in the room. If we cannot deal with the elephant, then we will not have enough place to maneuver in the room. So this is why the priority of Turkish perception, as we understand from their official narrative, first, a unified Syria, second, containment of Israeli threat, then cooperate as much as possible with the Gulf actors, because as this year called for Iran as annus horribilis, it could be the Pax Gulf Turkish cooperation in Syria. And this is why I think we will have more discussions on the Syrian future of Syrian governance. And once Lawrence of Arabia supported Sharif Hussein, then he changed his mind to Ibn Saud, or the policymakers in Europe changed. Turkey and Qatar was supporting other groups in Syria. Then they ended up with Ahmed al-Shara, which they cooperate closely at the moment. This is why the post-Syria, post-Assad Syria declares and manifests one more time, Turkey and Gulf can cooperate on this very critical situation if they have quite solid policy implications in their political elites' mind. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور بتول. لا شك انه طرحت قضايا مثار يمكن
issues. We might have some differences, new ideas presented, and I apologize because we are behind on time. We will take questions, but you cannot go over 3 minutes.
So,
Ask your questions and clarify to whom the questions are. Thank you, Chair. I really like all three research papers, and Dr. Ahmed's paper lacked some analysis. It presented many facts but lacked analysis. There is an article by Prince Turki Faisal that was published. It is from the grandfather to the grandson, where His Highness discussed many things that you mentioned, but this time from a descendant of the family. And also, why did Trump's stance change from the two-state solution? You mentioned these different dates and that he suddenly changed his mind. I believe there was a reaction when he saw the British, French, and people of Europe and people in New York, and he felt like the rug would be withdrawn from under him, and so he wanted to maneuver the situation. Also, the regression of the lobby in the USA. The question is why? Because the US people, the American people, after Al-Aqsa flood, have been changing the stereotypes in their minds and the images in their mind. And so there is a revolution against this kind of lobby. And the lobby couldn't stand against all of that. And also, among the factors for American failure, there are many factors, I agree with you. But you didn't talk about popular work. Even if it's not related to the USA, but it supports the Houthis, these hundreds of thousands that were in Al Sab'in Square, and any strike that they took because of Gaza turned into a force for the Houthis, and this led to their perseverance and the loss of United States. Thank you very much. I congratulate all of you. I'll just ask a question to Dr. Ahmed Azzam and Dr. Batul. I had the honor last year of speaking about the same issue, the two-state solution last year, and you reaffirmed something, which is that it is not only the two-state solution. No, it is the implementation of a two-state solution, and it took something from this implementation of a two-state solution, a Palestinian request to Israel. It has become an international request to Israel, and this is against the backdrop of Israel's explicit rejection of speaking of the two-state solution, and the USA being dragged in that direction. So I really liked what you said. I have some observations. When we talk about the doctrines, the Carter doctrine, Nixon doctrine before him, and the defensive agreement, the defense security agreement between Saudi Arabia and the USA, and you said that this was done in that framework. And I believe this is a category mistake as named by logicians. So Carter doctrine and Nixon doctrine regarding the Gulf security in general. But this agreement is only bilateral. So I believe we're not talking about the same thing here. So as for Prince Fahd Initiative 1981, I would have loved for you to continue the story because it's quite beneficial. In 1981, when he presented this initiative in the FAST summit, this created an uproar in the Arab world, and they accused him of treason. And Arafat, may he rest in peace, supported him, but he was dragged with his friends and other companions in Fatah movement, liberation organization, and Saudi Arabia had to withdraw that initiative. And so this is important, as it's important for self-criticism nowadays, and this is not related to the missing opportunities. It's related to having the ability to criticize ourselves. Any liberation movement throughout history needs this kind of learned lessons. You concluded and said the solution shouldn't wait for Israel, but the question is how? At the end of the day, Israel needs to be forced or convinced to do something. And so I don't know how you believe we can reach a solution without Israel. إذا دكتورة بتول، هل يمكنك أن تعطينا مثالا ملموسا على التنافس بين دول مجلس التعاون الخليج في سوريا؟ أنا لا أرى أيا من أوجه هذا التنافس، لكن
a question is really that lingers in many minds is what does Turkey really wants from Syria? What is the strategic view for Turkey as it sees Syria? What does it want? And the third element is that you talked about Syria, the GCC containing Israel, being the elephant in the room and the spoiler, potential or actual spoiler. How would you contain Israel? How would Turkey thinks of containing Israel without this is escalating into a war between Turkey and Israel, which I'm sure Turkey doesn't want, although the Israelis are starting that we should be ready for that eventuality. Thank you.
أمجد جبريل باحث في الشؤون الإقليمية.
Researcher in regional affairs. I would like to ask really loose generic question. Dr. Ahmad, how do you evaluate the entire Arab diplomacy approach in the settlement of conflicts? Is it a good approach or not? Do you believe that Arab diplomacies have a mission and objective and can leverage on that? And how can they implement their objectives if they do not have solid force? We were taught that diplomacy cannot achieve anything without solid force. So something that is more important, in the case of Palestine, settlement collapsed, but there are no alternatives. There are no well-known or proposed alternatives. This is a problem. Dean Elias Hanna wrote something important in Palestinian Studies Initiative about the Gaza war between strategy and tactic, and he said that no root transformation would take place in the Palestinian question unless the Egyptian stance changes. So if the Camp David is the pillar of the regional order, and then the Palestinian question will not take any steps ahead, even if there's a million 7th of October. So how can we turn the impossible of Israel into something that is possible, and the possible of the Arabs into something that is impossible? So they have failed diplomatically, developmentally, culturally, and so on so many other levels. And for Yemen, and I'm happy that we have 3 different cases here in the session. I believe that the case of Yemen is compound and strategic, and regardless of the internal um, drivers of the Houthis, but they took advantage of the Gaza war, and also Qatar and Algeria. They used it diplomatically. So, do the Houthis not have a real cause? Maybe, but at least they know how to move. They know how to maneuver. There are major countries that do not know how to maneuver. My Yemeni friends like this comment. Houthis are devils on land and an angel in air and in the sea. So I believe that one of the biggest mistakes in the Yemen war is to have a war with Yemen. Saudi Arabia could contain Yemen with long-term tools, and they've done that for 20 years. And I say there is sanctity for Arab relations. So any Arab party that would wage a war with another Arab country would lose to a great extent. Also, the case of Syria, I do not see at all that there is a winning party in the Syrian situation. It is a lose-lose situation for everyone. And I wrote about it, about the Syrian jihadist movement. And I can argue that the Syrian jihadism cannot be an option for change in Syria. The case of Syria is an anarchy used by Israel at the expense of all other parties. And by the way, if there is a regional winner of Syria, sorry, it is Israel. And last but not least, why are Gulf countries excited to support Syria, but not at the same level of excitement for the Palestinian question? They asked for lifting the sanctions from Syria, and they were given that. Why didn't they do that with the Palestinian cause? Because it is related to the Israeli actor, who is more important than all Arab actors, and no Arab actor can replace that. Thank you. Lemis and Doni, I would like to thank the panelists for their valuable presentations. First, I ask my friend Dr. Ahmed, I would like to add something. I do not think that Saudi policy or the Arab policy after the 7th of October was successful in ending the U.S. monopoly of the mediation and sponsorship role in resolving any conflict, and the USA usually resorts to managing conflicts, and they only want solutions that are in favor of Israel. And Arab countries have given the opportunity to the USA to go and enter via Trump's plan. And I invite you to read all of its items to control what is happening. So even worse, that they were even more successful in the Security Council resolution supported by Arab countries, unfortunately, because it recovered the main role of the USA. And we need to read Trump's plan and its items after the 10th item, especially into the 20th item, they all undermine the establishment of a Palestinian state. They undermine the right for self-determination not only in the West Bank, Jerusalem and Gaza, but for the entire Palestinian people in everywhere, no matter where they are. And also, we are not yet out of danger from the culture that Israel wants to impose via the Abrahamic Accords. They are the most dangerous Abrahamic normalization accords. They are a leap forwards for Israel to have normalization politically and economically and to accept the Zionist right in Palestine and end the Palestinian question completely. And for Mr. Fauzi, thank you very much, but I want to ask you, do you have a research paper that elaborates, because the Houthis have a role in resistance, but we are also interested in the social fabric inside Yemen. And Dr. Ahmad said that Arab countries shouldn't contribute to any Yemeni civil war because the conflict right now is an Arab conflict. Actually, regardless of the stances, we need one state, nation state in Yemen, a sovereign state. And not everything that the Houthis have done is positive in Yemen. Of course, I appreciate their role in resistance. That is correct. But this is due to the lack of Arab deterrence and undermining national security by Israel. So the Houthis are doing that. Like Hamas and Hezbollah, even Hamas and Hezbollah are acting in their own lands, but they are practicing resistance. And it's not the fault of Hezbollah and Houthis here, it's because of the void. And شكرا لك دكتورة. أردت
I'm sure you're aware of it, but it wasn't clear in your presentation. The Emirates is not interested in secularism in the Arab world. It's many secular opposition figures, and some of them were in the room today, didn't go to the Emirates. I'm not talking about, you're right about Qatar and Saudi Arabia leaning towards the Ikhwan and the Islamic groups. You're right. But it's a right-wing policy influenced by the right-wing think tanks in America that sees Islam as a threat. It's like Islamophobic. So it's not secularism. When you use the word secularism, I'm talking about the Emirates, not you, to fight, to support repressive actions and spur reaction and trigger and instigate repressive actions against the Islamists in the Arab countries. Just a clarification. Thank you.
Just a comment on the two-state solution that we're talking about. Unfortunately, this is a facet of humiliation for us. We are accepting leftovers. What the two-state solution? What do you mean by two-state solution? How many kilometers is would that state be? How many kilometers would we have? The Zionist officials themselves are stating that they do not want a two-state solution. They want to annex the West Bank. What two-state solution are we talking about? What state are we defending here? We've accepted this unfairness, and they don't even accept it back. Two quick questions for Dr. Ahmad. There is an opinion that for the first time in contemporary history, Saudi Arabia is directly in clash with Israel because all forces clashing with Israel are now non-existent or weakened, unable to take responsibility of the initiative. Of course, there's the resistant axis that has regressed. And so Israel is waiting for Saudi Arabia to have normalization. And it's clear that Saudi Arabia has reservations on these portfolios and the short and the medium term. So, from your perspective, do you believe that the issue for the Israeli Saudi difference will be related not only to Palestine but in the roles in the region, especially that Saudi Arabia wants to play a leading role in the region? And also, Mr. Fauzi, your paper was really nice. You focused on the historic events, but the way you addressed their reflections on the Gulf region and how the Gulf region states need to deal with the Houthis, maybe you didn't have time to mention all details. So the question again now, in light of the major transformations occurring in the southern parts of Yemen right now, and in light of the figures and numbers, you mentioned that they're dominating two-thirds of the community. They're no longer the militias, they are a military force. So how can the Gulf states deal with the Houthis in the upcoming phase? Thank you very much for the lecturers. Abdullah Attai, my question is for Dr. Ahmed Jamil Azam. Dr. Ahmed, there is no Israel without the USA, and that is a dilemma. And the devil is in the details. What is the form of the state? What are the boundaries of such a state? So there are Gulf Arab Saudi efforts that push towards this recognition, and we have seen UK and France and other countries recognizing the Palestinian state. However, we still don't know what shape the state will take. Also, my question to Dr. Fauzi or Mr. Fauzi, there is still something that we do not understand regarding the Houthi perseverance. In Iraq, the armed militias have 5 formal ports and tons or scores of informal ports. But in the geopolitical equation in Yemen and after the strikes, there are people who said that the Houthi involvement in the war was partially to silence the street on the economic poverty or bad situations. Also, Dr. Batul, we shouldn't forget that even Turkey wanted to be involved in direct conversations with al-Assad regime, and perhaps you failed to mention that in your presentation. And Turkey was not involved in the deterrence of the hostilities until after days of penetrating Aleppo. So it was my main question, my direct question to you: to what extent do you believe that some Gulf presence, not all of the Gulf presence, wants to reinforce itself in Syria just because of the competitiveness between the Gulf states and Turkey and among the Gulf states? Thank you to everyone, and I'm sorry to the other people who wanted to speak, but we need to finalize this session. Mr. Ahmad, you can start responding. Thank you for the questions. So my paper lacking analysis, I depended on comparison between two periods of time and so on and so forth. Why did Trump change his mind? I believe the Arab European stance was against Trump. What the US says isn't unchangeable completely. For example, the 1973 changed the USA's mind regarding some things. So why did the lobby regress in its leverage? Because of the genocide, the new generation that is quite informed. And another information, which is that there are differences within the Israeli lobby. In the past, they used to be only the APAC. Now they have three different formations without that lobby. This is one of the reasons. Dr. Asad, I would have loved to explain or elaborate on the history. The Fahd initiative, as you said, really requires more discussion, but perhaps not today. Is there a solution without Israel? And this question was asked twice, I believe. And this is a response to the other question too. This is not about having the Palestinian state as a target, and I realize that this is hard. But the idea here is that the Saudi European discourse is that we shouldn't wait for the negotiations. So we always talk about the launch of a negotiation, but the new Saudi approach says a menu of measures. So each country could choose what to do, recognize the Palestinian state, and this has legal repercussions, even vis-a-vis Israel, and also imposing sanctions on Israel, rejecting Israel. So the idea of acting without Israel, this is meant to refer to the process. So the whole world, as a Palestinian and as someone who was involved in decision making, the Europeans are always saying we are waiting for negotiations. So for example, are you dealing with the Israeli curricula as you are with the Palestinian school curricula? They're saying we're waiting for negotiations, but this is no more. I'm not saying that the Palestinian state will happen tomorrow. No, I concluded by saying that we need to manufacture something to confront Israel and not just have diplomatic talks. And also the Arab diplomacy, to evaluate the Arab diplomacy. This is difficult to do right now. But when Arabs move, things get better. And they moved in many occasions. The U.S. monopoly did not end indeed, but last September there were good Arab achievements, and I agree that Trump plan wants to circumvent this progress at the time being. Will Saudi Arabia confront Israel in a clash? I do not think that's likely. Everything that Netanyahu talked about, saying that Saudi Arabia will turn a blind eye to Palestine, it will be part of a new concept. This will not happen. I believe that Israel is internationally secluded right now to the point where they will not be in any confrontation with Saudi Arabia. And in the UN, the Security Council, there was a Security Council, but the New York conference that the US tried to prevent, they couldn't prevent it, and they adopted resolutions with little effort. But if we continue with the International Alliance for the Two-State Solution, the International Alliance for the Embodiment of the Palestinian State, I believe it will lead to good results, not necessarily in the recognition of a state, but maybe changing the balance of powers and confronting Israel soon. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Jamil. Mr. Fauzi, go ahead. Starting with the last question by Abdullah, the Houthi perseverance. I believe comparing the Houthis to other militias, the Iraqi militias, is not a fair comparison because they inherited a government, central state, and responsibilities. Also, there is a huge population. They have taxes, revenues. So revenues is an outlet for them, and the adaptability that they have as per the circumstances around them. And you mentioned that the economic situation was bad. And 7th of October was like escaping reality in Yemen as a whole, and not just the territories dominated by the Houthis. People or civil servants are not receiving their salaries, be it in the regions controlled by the Houthis or by the legitimate government. And you talked about people protesting. Sometimes people are protesting, yes, spontaneously, but sometimes they are mobilized by certain groups. And for example, around 9 million people uh, gathered to greet and support Ali Abdullah Saleh. 2 months later, he was overthrown and killed. So gaining the narrative was beneficial for Houthis because they used the ideology that they inherited in their education, confronting in their confrontation with America and Israel. The last question from Alawi. My paper is 9,000 words, but the presentation was very short and I couldn't go into all details. But I clarified in the paper how Gulf countries should deal with it. As for the domestic social fabric, perhaps we can discuss that over the break. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fauzi.
Answer, please, the question.
Like my colleague mentioned, it's a long paper, but
أول أن مرة
Again, I would like to thank the three panelists and thank all of you for attending and sitting with us even though we are behind on time. Of course, I believe all of these presentations were based on patriotism and nationalism. We all know that we have one common enemy here, which is the Zionist entity and those supporting it. And many initiatives target defending our projects with various efforts. We might disagree on our efforts, but we all have the same nationalist